12 hours before his wedding, Kan Min Jun was walking through JFK Airport after the final business meeting that would secure a billion-dollar alliance between two powerful families. By this time tomorrow, he was supposed to be a married man. Everything about his future had already been decided. Then a little boy carrying a bouquet of white lilies ran straight into him. Flowers scattered across the polished floor. The boy immediately stepped back, ready to apologize. Then he froze. His eyes widened. Slowly, he reached up and touched his silver-white hair, then pointed at Min Jun. The same silver-white hair, the same gray eyes, the same face. Then the little boy smiled. And suddenly Min Jun wasn't looking at a stranger anymore. He was looking at a younger version of himself. "Why do you look like me?" Min Jun felt his chest tighten, because standing in front of him looked exactly like a younger version of himself. Then a voice cut through the crowded terminal. "Zion." Min Jun's heart stopped. 6 years disappeared in an instant, because he knew that voice. Standing several feet away was Sandra, the woman he had loved, the woman he had lost, the woman he had spent 6 years trying to forget. And judging by the look on her face, she was just as shocked to see him. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved, while between them stood a little boy who had no idea he had just shattered both their worlds. Stay with me, because 12 hours from now, Kang Min Jun is supposed to marry another woman. Instead, he has just come face to face with the woman he lost, and the son he never knew existed. Will he board the flight back to Seoul and marry the woman waiting for him at the altar? Or will he stay and fight for the family he abandoned 6 years ago? And if you were Sandra, would you trust the man who broke your heart, disappeared from your life, and never even knew he had a son? Before we continue, subscribe to Afro-Korean Tales for more emotional and powerful love stories. Then tell me in the comments, what would you do if you discovered you had a 6-year-old child only 12 hours before your wedding? Now let's go back 6 years earlier. Kang Min Jun is 23, the heir to one of Korea's most feared business and criminal empires. In his 3rd year studying business, he will never need to use for himself, surrounded by professors who grade him gently and classmates who laugh slightly too hard at things he says. He has never once in his life wondered whether people liked him for himself until when he saw Sandra Okafor. Sandra Okafor is 20, Nigerian, carrying a single photograph that has consumed her entire life since her father's death. Her father raised her alone in Lagos and told her, in his final hours, that her mother had been Korean, that he had spent 20 years searching and never found her, and that Sandra should keep looking. She arrives in Korea on a scholarship that she treats as a cover story for the real mission underneath it. Sandra sits 2 rows ahead of him in a shared elective neither of them particularly needs, and Min Jun notices her the way you notice silence in a room full of noise. She doesn't perform like the people he knew. She asks questions that make professors pause before answering, the kind of question that reveals someone has actually been thinking rather than simply listening. Min Jun watches her work out an idea in real time, turning it over out loud, unbothered by the dozen other students watching her do it. He finds it more interesting than anything else that has happened to him that semester. Their first real conversation happens over a book she's reading for a translation assignment, an old text with a section he happens to know well from childhood tutoring he resented at the time, and is suddenly grateful for. He offers a correction, gently, the way you offer something you're not sure will be welcome. She looks up at him properly for the first time. He learns, slowly, that she works nights, a cafe some mornings and a convenience store other evenings, and that she walks home alone afterward through streets that don't always feel safe at that hour. He starts appearing outside the convenience store at closing time without asking permission, just present, leaning against a wall like he is nowhere better to be, until it becomes something she expects rather than something that startles her. She tells him, eventually, about her father, about the photograph, about a mother she has never met, and a promise she made at a hospital bed. He tells her, in return, about his father's expectations. Not deep, just enough. They build trust in the space between what's said and what's withheld. He starts helping her with the search without ever making it sound like help. A contact who knows immigration archives. A name that opens a door that had been closed to her for months. He never asks for credit. She never makes it sentimental. They sit in the library long after it should have closed, her papers spread across the table, his quiet competence filling in the gaps her year of effort hadn't managed to close. Weeks become months. Library, then cafes, then the walks home that stretch longer than they need to. Somewhere in there, without either of them marking the exact moment, friendship becomes something neither of them is prepared to name out loud. It rains the night everything changes. He's supposed to leave by 10. He doesn't. They end up at her apartment with tea going cold and the rain knocking steadily against the window, and somewhere past midnight, he says something he's never said to anyone in his life, that he doesn't know who he would be if his father's expectations were lifted off him tomorrow, that being near her is the only time he remembers what breathing without performance feels like. Sandra tells him she has been waiting to hear him say something true for months. The kiss happens because neither of them decides to stop it. They start dating officially after that, quietly, carefully, the way you protect something you already suspect the world will try to take from you. For 16 months they built something real, complete and whole. Then, weeks before his 25th birthday, his father finds out. His father calls him into a private study and tells him, plainly, to end it. A foreign scholarship student. No family. No standing. No place in the future being built for the empire. Min Jun says he needs time. His father interprets hesitation as disrespect, and disrespect, in that house, always has consequences. The pressure that follows lands on Sandra instead of on him, because that is how his father has always preferred to fight, sideways, through whoever is more exposed. Her scholarship comes under sudden review no one in her department can explain clearly. Her visa develops an irregularity that didn't exist a month earlier. A housing complication appears out of nowhere. A research position she had been informally promised disappears without a word. She has watched Min Jun's shoulders tighten every time she mentions yet another problem, and she knows the shape of a powerful man clearing an obstacle out of his son's way. "I'll fix it," Min Jun tells her. She waits. "Give me time," he says again. She waits longer than she should, because she has watched him be brave in every small way that mattered up until now, and she still believes the big bravery is coming. Then comes his 25th birthday gala. Sandra watches from her apartment. She watched his father take the stage and introduce Soo-yoon, a young woman standing beside him, composed, beautiful, exactly the kind of choice the empire would make for itself. A future alliance. A coming marriage. The room erupts into the particular applause reserved for things people understand they're required to celebrate. Sandra sits with the remote in her hand, waiting for one sentence. Just one phone call, 3 words that would cost him something real. She doesn't get them. Min Jun stands beside his father on a stage in front of hundreds of people and says nothing at all, and in the silence that follows, Sandra understands something she has been refusing to understand for 16 months. He was never going to choose her when the moment actually arrived. He was only ever going to ask for more time. 2 days later, she sits on the edge of her bathtub staring at a pregnancy result that rearranged the rest of her life before she even fully understands it. She books a flight for the following week. But before she left Korea, she followed one last lead connected to her mother, a name tied to an old residential address on the far edge of the city. She almost lets it go. She is exhausted, 7 weeks pregnant, with a flight to catch and an entire life left to quietly dismantle. The address leads her to Kim Song-min, who answers his own door, broad-shouldered even in old age, with the careful eyes of a man who learned decades ago to read people quickly. He looks at her face and goes very still. She shows him the photograph. His hand comes up slowly. His fingers touch the edge of it. "That's my daughter," he says, his voice barely holding together. She's been gone 18 years. He is 68, a man who built one of the most respected labor unions in Korean American history, who has testified before government committees and negotiated contracts that protected thousands of workers across 2 continents. None of it has filled the space his daughter left behind when she died, and none of it prepared him for the possibility that she had left something else behind too, something standing in his doorway holding a photograph he never knew existed. Sandra tells him everything. He listens without interrupting. When she reaches the pregnancy, his expression settles into something that has already made its decision before she finishes the sentence. He will not let her face this alone. Not pity, just the plain, immovable belief that family does not abandon family, no matter how recently the family was found. She goes with him to America. 6 months later, Zion is born on a Thursday morning, small and furious, silver hair and gray eyes that take in the delivery room like he's already cataloging it. Grandpa Kim holds his great-grandson for the first time and falls in love the way old men sometimes do with things they were certain they would never get to hold. Sandra studies. She works. She raises her son through long nights. She became a respected labor rights attorney whose name precedes her into rooms. 6 years passed that way. Grandpa Kim had been away at a labor conference in Geneva for nearly 2 weeks, and Zion had spent most of that time counting the days until he came home. It was Zion's idea to bring flowers. He'd used his own money to buy a bouquet of white lilies and now carried them proudly through JFK Airport, weaving through the crowd a few steps ahead of his mother. Sandra followed behind, smiling despite herself. The plan was simple. Pick up Grandpa Kim and go home. Several gates away, Kan Min Jun was leaving the final business meeting before his wedding. In less than 12 hours, he was supposed to marry the woman chosen for him. Neither of them had any reason to be walking toward the same terminal at the same moment. Until they did. And on an ordinary afternoon in a crowded airport, a little boy carrying white lilies ran into a man he had never met, looked up, and saw his own face staring back at him. For 1 second, nobody moved. Zion stood between them holding his father's lapel like he'd known him his whole life, completely unaware that he was standing in the middle of the worst and best thing that had ever happened to either adult in this terminal. Around them, the airport kept moving. Announcements. Rolling suitcases. A child somewhere crying about a dropped ice cream cone. None of it touched the small, frozen space where Sandra and Min Jun stood. Sandra moved first. She crossed the distance between them and pulled Zion back gently by the shoulder, not yanking him, just repositioning him slightly behind her, an old instinct she didn't examine before acting on it. Zion, baby, go pick up your flowers. But mommy, he has my... I know, sweetheart. Go get the lilies. Something in her voice made him obey without further argument, even though his eyes kept cutting back toward Min Jun the entire walk to where the bouquet had scattered across the floor. Then it was just the two of them, 6 years compressed into 11 feet of airport tile. Sandra. Her name in his mouth again, after 6 years, did something to her chest she refused to let show on her face. She had gotten very good at that. It was a skill she'd built the hard way. Don't, she said. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just final. You have no right to ask. Sandra, is he? You already know the answer. You did the math the second he opened his mouth. I watched you do it. He looked like a man who had been hit by something he should have seen coming from a great distance. 6 years, he said. That was all. His voice didn't carry past the two of them. Yes. He didn't ask the next question. He didn't seem capable of forming it. His eyes moved past her, to where Zion was crouched gathering the last of the scattered lilies, and something in his face went slack in a way that had nothing composed left in it. That was the exact moment Grandpa Kim came through the arrivals gate, wheeling a single suitcase, scanning the crowd for the two faces he'd missed for 11 days. He found Sandra first. Then he followed the line of her shoulders to the man standing across from her, and his expression shifted from tired traveler to something far older before he'd closed half the distance. He didn't ask who it was. He didn't need to. The silver white hair, the gray eyes, the rigid set of Sandra's spine he hadn't seen since the week she arrived on his doorstep pregnant and alone. Grandpa K. Zion abandoned the bouquet on a nearby bench and ran, wrapping both arms around his grandfather's legs. There's a man here who looks just like me. Grandpa Kim's hand settled on the boy's head, steadying him, his eyes never once leaving Min Jun's face. He studied him slowly, the way you study something you don't trust enough to look away from. He didn't speak. Not one word. He simply looked, taking in everything, giving nothing back, his silence somehow louder than anything he could have said. Sandra didn't introduce them. She didn't explain. She crossed to where Zion stood, scooped the lilies up off the bench herself, and took her son's hand. She turned, and Grandpa Kim turned with her without a word passing between them, the way people move who have spent years learning to read each other without needing language for it. Zion looked back once over his shoulder, the lilies bumping against his chest, his expression more curious than upset, a child clocking something important without yet understanding the shape of it. Then his mother's hand tightened slightly around his, and he faced forward again. The three of them walked toward the exit. Nobody looked back a second time. Min Jun stood there a long time after they disappeared into the crowd, holding nothing, surrounded by white petals no one had bothered to sweep away. Then he moved. He didn't think about his flight. He didn't think about Seoul, or his father, or the hundreds of people already gathering at a venue 12 hours from now expecting to watch him become a married man. None of it occupied any space in him at all. There was only the back of a small head with silver-white hair disappearing through the terminal doors, and the absolute certainty that he could not let it disappear without knowing where it went. He followed them out to the curb at a distance, close enough to see Grandpa Kim load the suitcase into a car, close enough to see Zion climb into the back seat still clutching his lilies, close enough to see Sandra get in last, and not once look back toward the building. Min Jun got into a hired car without giving the driver a destination beyond. Follow that car. Stay back. His driver, to his credit, didn't ask why. They drove for 40 minutes. Min Jun watched the city change through the window without registering any of it, his mind circling the same handful of images over and over. He thought he had spent 6 years already knowing the worst version of what his silence had cost him. He understood now that he hadn't known anything at all. The car ahead of them eventually slowed outside a modest house on a quiet street, warm light already on in the front windows like someone had left it burning in anticipation of exactly this homecoming. He told the driver to park directly in front of the house, not down the street, not in shadow between two lampposts, but right there at the curb where anyone looking out a window would see him without trying. He didn't know if that was deliberate or simply the only place his body had let the car stop. He watched as Grandpa Kim climbed out, as Zion ran ahead up the front path still holding his flowers, as Sandra followed more slowly, her arms crossed against the evening cold, glancing once across the black sedan parked across from the house before she went inside. He sat outside that house with no plan, no next move. He simply could not make himself leave. 12 hours from now, he was supposed to be standing at an altar in Seoul. Instead, he was staring at the house where his son lived. Tell me in the comments. If you discovered you had a 6-year-old son only 12 hours before your wedding, would you still go through with the ceremony? Or fight for the family you lost 6 years ago? Because Min Jun is about to make the biggest decision of his life. The front door closed behind them, and for a few minutes the house did what houses do after a long day. Shoes came off. Bags landed in their usual spots. Grandpa Kim set his suitcase by the stairs with a particular sigh of a man who had spent 2 weeks sleeping in unfamiliar beds and was grateful to be done with it. Zion launched into the version of the last 11 days he'd clearly been composing the entire flight home, except it wasn't the last 11 days at all. It was everything except the airport. Sandra noticed the omission, the way you notice a held breath. She kept stirring something at the stove that didn't strictly need stirring, listening for the moment it would surface, half expecting it the entire time Zion talked, and it simply never came. He chattered through dinner, and somewhere in the middle of it she realized he wasn't avoiding the subject. He had simply moved on the way children do, filing the evening's strangeness somewhere it didn't need daily maintenance, at least not yet. Zion went to bed around 8, worn out from the airport and the excitement of Grandpa Kim's return in roughly equal measure. Sandra read him half a chapter of something about a boy and a treehouse, and he was asleep before she'd finished the page. She came downstairs to find Grandpa Kim sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea poured, one already pushed across to her usual seat. "You don't have to talk about it," he said. "I know. I'm saying that so you understand you don't have to. Not so you'll feel obligated to anyway." Sandra sat down and wrapped both hands around the cup without drinking from it. "There's nothing to talk about. He was at the airport. We left. That's the whole story." Grandpa Kim looked at her the way he'd looked at Min Jun in the terminal, patient, unreadable, entirely unconvinced. He didn't push. He never had to push with her. She usually got there on her own, given enough silence to fall into. "He's getting married in 12 hours, she said eventually, staring at the steam rising off her tea. "Was supposed to be, anyway. I don't know if today changes that for him. I don't particularly care." "You care," Grandpa Kim said, not unkindly. "That's allowed." "I don't want it to be allowed." "I know." He patted her hand once, briefly, and stood. "Go to bed, Sandra. Tomorrow's a normal day whether you sleep or not. Might as well sleep through some of it." She went up not long after, but sleep didn't come easily. She lay there listening to the house settle. At some point past midnight, unable to stop herself, she got up and went to the window, telling herself she was just checking that the porch light hadn't burned out again. The car was still there, parked directly in front of the house, exactly where it had been when they'd pulled into the driveway hours earlier, like it hadn't moved an inch. She could see the shape of him behind the wheel in the dim wash of the streetlight, unmoving, not on his phone, not reclined like someone trying to sleep, just sitting there with the particular stillness of a man who had nowhere else he was willing to be. She stood at the window longer than she meant to. Long enough that the cold from the glass started to seep through her sleeve. Long enough to feel something complicated rise in her chest that she didn't have a clean name for, something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite the opposite of it. She let the curtain fall and went back to bed, and did not sleep for a long time. Min Jun's phone hadn't stopped vibrating since sometime around 9. His father, first 3 calls in quick succession, then nothing, which was somehow worse than the calls themselves, because his father's silence had always meant recalculation rather than surrender. Then his assistant, increasingly clipped with each voicemail. Then his father again twice more, the second one trailing into a text. "Where are you? This is not a request." He read it once, and set the phone face down on the passenger seat. He thought, somewhere around 1 in the morning, that he should probably feel something about the wedding itself, the venue being prepared a continent away, the guests who would start arriving in a matter of hours expecting a ceremony that no longer had a groom invested in attending it. He searched for that feeling and couldn't locate it. It was like reaching for a limb that had gone numb. He knew it should hurt. It simply didn't, not compared to the specific, immediate ache of a 6-year-old boy's voice saying, "Mommy says I got my hair from my daddy," on a loop he couldn't shut off. He thought about the sentence he never said at the gala. He'd thought about it for 6 years in the abstract, a regret with soft edges, something he revisited the way you revisit an old injury, aware of it without it actively hurting. Sitting outside this house, it didn't feel abstract anymore. It felt like the exact shape of everything he'd lost, measured out precisely. 1 boy's height, 1 boy's laugh, 6 birthdays, 6 Christmases, 1,000 ordinary Tuesday evenings he would never get back, no matter what he did from this point forward. Around 2, he thought about going up to the door. He didn't move. He didn't trust what would come out of his mouth if someone opened it, and some part of him understood, with unusual clarity for a man who rarely doubted himself, that whatever he said in the next 24 hours mattered more than almost anything he'd said in the last 6 years, which meant saying nothing felt safer than saying it wrong. Around 3, his phone buzzed one final time. His father. "If you are not at this airport by 6, you will not have a company to return to." Min Jun looked at it for a long moment, then turned the phone over again without responding, and found, with something like surprise, that the threat didn't move him at all. He had spent 31 years organizing his entire life around not disappointing that man. Sitting in a cold car outside a stranger's house, watching a single porch light flicker against the dark, the company felt like the least real thing in his life. Sandra came downstairs just before 7 and found Zion standing on a chair in the kitchen. He was packing a paper bag with the serious concentration he reserved for important tasks. A banana, 2 granola bars, half a sleeve of crackers. Sandra followed the direction of his attention. Through the window, the car was still there. So was the man inside it. Zion glanced outside once more, folded the top of the bag carefully, then climbed down from the chair. Sandra said nothing. She should have. She should have asked what he was doing. She should have told him to stay inside. She should have reminded herself that the man sitting in that car was no longer her problem. Instead, she stood by the counter and watched her son carry the bag to the front door. A moment later, she watched him cross the yard. She did not stop him. Zion walked with the careful concentration of someone on an important and possibly secret mission. Min Jun rolled down his window before the boy reached the car. "Hi," Zion said, holding up a small paper bag that had clearly been packed by a child rather than an adult. A banana, 2 granola bars, and what looked like half a sleeve of crackers, slightly crushed. "I brought you breakfast." Min Jun blinked at him, several seconds behind on processing the sentence. "You brought me breakfast. You've been out here since last night." Zion said it like an observation about the weather, plain and unembarrassed. "I saw your car when I went to bed, and it was still there this morning. That's a really long time to not eat anything." "It is," Min Jun agreed, because it was the only true thing he could think to say. Zion held the bag up higher, insistent. "You look sad," he added, with the brutal, unfiltered accuracy only children manage. "And kind of hungry. And lonely. Mommy says when people look like that you're supposed to feed them because nobody thinks straight when they're hungry, and being lonely is worse on an empty stomach." Min Jun took the bag because there was nothing else to do with his hands, and something about the weight of it, a banana and 2 granola bars and crushed crackers, undid something in his chest more completely than the entire sleepless night had managed. "Thank you," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he meant it to. "You're welcome." Zion studied him for a moment with open, unhurried curiosity, the same way he'd studied him in the terminal the day before. "Are you going to sleep out here again tonight?" "I don't know yet." "Okay." Zion seemed to accept this completely, the way children accept uncertain answers from adults they've already decided to trust. He turned to go back inside, then paused halfway up the path and looked back over his shoulder. "There's more crackers in the kitchen if you want. I can bring you more later." Then he was gone, back up the steps and through the front door, leaving Min Jun alone in the car with a paper bag in his lap and the particular, unbearable tenderness of having just been shown more kindness by a 6-year-old than he had received from his own father in 25 years. He didn't eat right away. He sat with the bag in his lap, the banana and crushed crackers and granola bars arranged with a child's careful seriousness, and something about the weight of it kept him from moving. He had negotiated with men who controlled ports and shipping lanes. He had never once, in 31 years, been handed something with that kind of unguarded generosity, given for no reason except that someone smaller than him decided he needed feeding. He called his father. "Where are you?" "New York." "You have a wedding in." "I canceled it." The silence on the line was the kind that had once made executives reschedule entire quarters. Min Jun had heard it aimed at other people his whole life, never at himself, until now. "Do you understand what you have just?" "I have a son," he said, 6 years old. "I found out yesterday by accident, and I'm not marrying anyone else while he exists 3 blocks from here." "That woman." "Don't." The word came out harder than he meant it to, an echo of the one Sandra had used on him in the terminal. "I let you talk about her like that once. Never again." His father hung up. Min Jun understood exactly what the silence meant. Not surrender. Recalculation. He waited for the panic that always came after disappointing his father. It didn't arrive. What came instead was something close to calm, the feeling of a man who'd finally stopped running numbers he no longer needed. He looked at the paper bag still sitting on the passenger seat. Then he began eating. He ate slowly, deliberately, and somewhere around the second granola bar his throat tightened in a way that had nothing to do with hunger. He had negotiated billion-dollar contracts without his composure slipping once. He sat in a borrowed car on a residential street and nearly came apart over crushed crackers a 6-year-old had packed for him, because he looked lonely. It was the first thing his son had ever given him. He understood, eating it, that it was also the first conversation, and somehow it had mattered more than every carefully worded statement he'd ever delivered in a boardroom. He watched Sandra walk Zion to school not long after. The boy talked the whole way, hands gesturing at something invisible, and Sandra laughed at whatever he said. She didn't look toward the curb once. His phone didn't stop after that. Texts from his fiancée, calls from his mother. By noon the story was public. Someone at the venue had talked, someone always did, and by 2 his name was trending across 3 countries, attached to words like runaway and disgrace. None of it true in any way that mattered. None of it mentioning a 6-year-old boy at all. Soo-yoon's father issued something close to a threat. His own father's company said nothing, which felt worse. By 2, Min Jun searched the internet for what 6-year-olds like. Zion was back outside the house when the school bus rounded the corner just after 3. Zion spotted the car and broke into a run. "You're still here. I told you I might be. Did you sleep in your car again?"
No.
"I went and got something instead." Zion's eyes landed on the box and his whole face rearranged itself around pure delight. "Is that a telescope? You like space, right?" "I love space." He dropped his backpack, already reaching. "Mommy got me a toy one, but it's just plastic with a moon sticker." "Is this a real one?" "It's real." They set it up on the grass while there was still light, which turned quickly into Zion explaining, at length, the difference between a planet and a star, a distinction he was very confident and slightly wrong about. Min Jun didn't correct him. "You have really nice hair," Zion said eventually, squinting up at him. "It's like mine but old person colored." "Thank you." That wasn't a compliment. I took it as one. Zion grinned. "Do you like your hair?"
Either.
"Do you like yours?" "It's okay." He considered this seriously. "I like that it's the same as yours, though. That part's kind of cool." Min Jun didn't trust his voice enough to answer right away. He crouched down instead, helped angle the telescope toward whatever was visible past the streetlights, and for a few minutes neither of them said anything else, which felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, like exactly enough. Sandra and Grandpa Kim watched Zion and Min Jun talk. "He deserves to know his father," Grandpa Kim said. Sandra nodded. Hours later, Min Jun knocked on the door. Grandpa Kim opened on the second knock. He studied Min Jun carefully, then said, "She's at the dining." Sandra sat in the dining area with some pictures in front of her, and a book. Min Jun sat across from her. She studied him for a moment, then said, "You didn't leave." "No," he paused. "I canceled my wedding. I called my father myself. I told him I have a son, and I'm not marrying anyone else while that's true." He said what I expected him to say. I let him say it, and then I told him I didn't care and hung up. "You canceled your wedding?" "Yes." "That was the right thing to do." Silence. "It doesn't make you a father." She paused. "Don't let him get attached if you're not staying." She slid the photo album across the table instead, its cover soft at the corners from years of small hands opening it. He turned the pages slowly. Zion as an infant, red-faced and furious. Zion at 1, soap suds in his hair. Zion at 5, gripping a science fair ribbon with both hands. His own face stared back at him from every photo, younger with each page, a childhood he had no part in. She set a worn notebook beside. It contains recipes of his favorite foods, what he won't eat, what makes him laugh so hard he can't breathe. She tapped the cover. This book contains 6 years of learning him, one day at a time, because there was no one else to learn it. "If you stay," she held his gaze. "Show me. That's the only thing that means anything now." Min Jun looked down at the notebook. 6 years of Zion's life sat between his hands. 6 years he could never get back. His throat tightened. "I don't know how to make up for 6 years. Sandra held his gaze. "You can't." The words landed gently. Somehow that made them hurt more. "Then I'll start with tomorrow." Sandra looked at him for a long moment, measuring him, judging whether she believed him. Then she pushed the notebook across the table. "Zion hates tomatoes." Footsteps pounded down the stairs. Zion rounded the corner in his socks, hair mussed, and stopped the second he saw who was sitting at the table. His whole face lit up. His whole face lit up. Uncle Min Jun. The name landed strangely in a room. Min Jun smiled despite himself. "Hey, buddy." Zion hurried closer, then slowed. Something had caught his attention. His eyes dropped to the open photo album, then to the notebook beside it. He frowned. That notebook lived in the kitchen drawer. Mommy wrote things in it all the time. his favorite foods, things he liked, things he didn't. She never left it lying around for strangers. Zion looked at the album again, at the photographs spread across the table, then at Min Jun, then back at his mother. Mommy. Sandra looked up. Why is he looking at my baby pictures? Nobody answered immediately. Zion's eyes moved between them. The silence seemed to stretch. Then something clicked. The silver-white hair, the gray eyes, the way Uncle Min Jun had stared at him in the airport, the way Mommy had stared at Uncle Min Jun, the strange feeling that everybody in the room knew something he didn't. His eyes widened. Slowly, he looked at Min Jun, then at his mother. His voice was barely above a whisper. Is Uncle Min Jun my daddy? Sandra's hand settled gently over his. Yes. Zion blinked, then blinked again. He's my dad. Yes. Like, for real? A tiny smile touched Sandra's face. For real. Zion stared at Min Jun for several long seconds. Not scared. Not upset. Just thinking. Trying to fit this new piece into the world he already understood. He met his gaze. Why didn't you come before? The room went silent. Min Jun felt the question settle somewhere deep inside him. Because there wasn't an answer that wouldn't hurt. He looked at Zion. And for the first time in 6 years, he chose not to hide behind silence. Because I made a mistake, he said quietly. A big one. When your mom needed me most, I was afraid. And because I was afraid, I wasn't there. Zion absorbed that with the serious concentration only children seemed capable of. Then he asked, Are you leaving again? Min Jun didn't hesitate. No. Zion studied him for another moment, then nodded once. Okay. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't trust. Not yet. It was simply a 6-year-old deciding that, for now, he was willing to believe him. And somehow, that felt like the most important thing Min Jun had ever been given. Min Jun found an apartment 6 blocks from Sandra's house within the week, small and unremarkable, the opposite of everything he'd ever lived in. What Min Jun did first was quiet. He fixed the dripping kitchen faucet Sandra never seemed to have time for. He repaired Zion's bicycle when the chain kept slipping. When Sandra casually mentioned that Zion always wore down the left heel of his shoes first, the next pair that appeared by the door fit perfectly. She didn't thank him. He never asked her to. He learned Zion the same way Sandra once had, one day at a time. He learned that Zion liked his rice slightly undercooked, hated sleeping with the closet door open, and hummed the same 3 off-key notes whenever he concentrated. Min Jun paid attention to all of it. At first, he was simply there. Waiting at school pickup. Sitting through parent-teacher meetings. Standing on the sidelines of soccer games. Never demanding attention. Never missing a chance to show up. Zion noticed the consistency before he trusted it. For weeks, he treated Min Jun's presence as a fact rather than a relationship, the way children accept strange new furniture in a familiar house. Then slowly something shifted. He began saving stories for him, specifically, the way he used to save them only for Grandpa Kim. He started asking, before any school event, whether Min Jun would be there, and grew quietly upset on the one occasion Min Jun missed a recital because of an unavoidable legal call. An upset Min Jun answered not with an excuse, but with an apology and a promise he then kept every time afterward without exception. Sandra watched everything from a distance. She noticed that he never used Zion to get closer to her. He never asked for credit, never made promises, never tried to force his way back into their lives. He simply did the ordinary work of being a father. She found, against her better judgment, that she had stopped waiting for him to slip. Then the photograph surfaced. Someone outside the school had recognized him, and within a day the story was everywhere. Korea's disgraced runaway groom, hiding an American woman and a secret child, the tabloids filling in details nobody had confirmed with details that were mostly wrong. Reporters appeared outside Sandra's office. Her name was printed. Zion's school was mentioned by name in one particularly reckless piece before anyone managed to get it taken down. Min Jun didn't wait for advice. He called a press conference himself and said plainly that he had loved a woman 6 years ago and been too afraid to choose her publicly, that he had never known about his son until an accidental meeting at an airport, that none of what had happened was Sandra's fault, and that he would not allow either of them to be turned into a story for public consumption. He took every accusation directly onto himself and answered none of the questions about Sandra or Zion specifically, no matter how the questions were phrased. A week later, he resigned as president of his father's company. He didn't frame it as sacrifice. He framed it, in the brief statement his team released, as a decision to focus entirely on his family, leaving the empire to operate without the distraction of his personal life attached to its name. Privately, the truth was simpler and harder. He understood that as long as he held that position, Sandra and Zion would always be material for someone, somewhere, looking to attack him through them. Stepping down didn't end the scrutiny immediately, but it removed the largest target from both their backs, and he did it without negotiating for credit, without telling Sandra beforehand, simply presenting her with the outcome already in motion. The public reaction split predictably. Some called him a coward finally facing consequences. Some called the resignation a publicity stunt. A few slowly began to understand it for what it actually was. Sandra read all of it and said almost nothing to him about it, except once, quietly, that she hadn't expected him to actually do it. His father had expected something else entirely. What Min Jun didn't know, in the weeks after his resignation, was that his father had stopped trying to win him back through pressure and started planning something colder. Working through Soo-yoon's father, furious at the public humiliation his daughter had suffered, the two men arranged something neither of them needed to say out loud in detail, a way to force Min Jun back into the fold by removing his only remaining reason to stay away. It happened on an ordinary Thursday during school pickup, the kind of afternoon that looked exactly like every other afternoon until it didn't. A car idled near the school gate. A man neither Zion nor his teacher recognized claimed, with practiced calm, to be sent by his father to collect him early. Zion, trained by years of Grandpa Kim's quiet rules about who was allowed to take him anywhere, hesitated. That hesitation was the only reason a teacher noticed anything wrong at all, and within seconds the school's security guard was at the gate. The man was gone before anyone caught the plate, and Zion was standing exactly where he'd been told to stand, shaken but entirely unharmed. Min Jun got the call from the school before he'd even left his apartment. Min Jun didn't need confirmation to know who was behind it. He filed a police report that afternoon, named names he had every reason to protect 6 months earlier and none now, and watched the officer's expression change as the report connected to a name everyone in Korea recognized. That evening, sitting at Sandra's kitchen table with Zion finally asleep upstairs, Min Jun told her everything he suspected, plainly, without softening it. "My father wants me back in the company," he said. "He's run out of ways to ask nicely. I think this was meant to scare me into coming home. Not to hurt Zion. Just to remind me what he's capable of arranging." Sandra's hands were steady around her tea, though her voice wasn't quite. "That's not a man who should be running anything." "No," Min Jun agreed. "He shouldn't." He spent the following weeks building something more permanent than fear. He hired private security for the school without announcing it as anything more than an updated safety policy, donated quietly enough that no reporter connected it to him. He met with lawyers to gather everything he had ever witnessed or suspected about his father's business practices. He spent late nights compiling what amounted to a confession he had never been brave enough to give until now. Then he did the thing his father least expected. He testified. He handed over everything, his own complicity included, refusing the easy version where he positioned himself only as a victim of his father's ambition. The story broke within days, dwarfing the runaway groom headlines that had come before it. His father's company faced an investigation that would take months to resolve, board members resigning ahead of the fallout, alliances dissolving overnight. Min Jun lost what remained of his standing in an industry that had once organized itself around his name. She found out from the news, the same as everyone else, and called him that night. "You gave them everything." Min Jun was quiet for a moment. "Yes." "You knew what it would cost." "Yes." "The company. Your inheritance. Your father." "Yes." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Sandra asked the question she hadn't been able to stop thinking about since she saw the headlines. "Why now?" Min Jun leaned back in his chair. 6 years ago, I knew what my father was doing to you, he said quietly. Not all of it, but enough to understand where it was coming from. And I told myself I needed more time, more information, a better moment to stand up to him. Every excuse sounded reasonable while I was making it. His voice didn't rise. If I'd spoken then, you might have stayed. The silence that followed felt different. Smaller. More honest. I can't change that, he continued. But when that man showed up at Zion's school, I realized my father was still counting on the same thing he counted on 6 years ago. What? My silence. Sandra closed her eyes briefly. And this time, she asked. Min Jun looked out the window. This time the only thing worth protecting was you and Zion. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Sandra said quietly, "That's the first time you've proven it instead of just saying it." Sandra watched him give up the last of what remained of his old life without flinching, and something in her finally settled into place. "I want to take this slow," she told him one evening, 3 months later, the two of them sitting on her porch while Zion and Grandpa Kim argued cheerfully inside about whose turn it was at the chessboard. "Not because I don't trust you anymore. I do, more than I expected to. But I want us to build this the right way this time. No urgency. No gala. Just time." "I can do slow," Min Jun said. "I've spent 6 years learning I'm not in any hurry that matters more than getting this right." She smiled at that, small and real, and reached over to take his hand, not as a promise of anything specific, just as an acknowledgement of where they actually were. Not finished, not fully healed, but finally, honestly, standing in the same direction together. A year later, Min Jun is not boarding a private jet or sitting across from lawyers. He's in Sandra's kitchen on a Sunday morning, failing, again, to make the rice exactly the way Zion likes it. Slightly undercooked. Slightly stubborn. A detail he still cannot get right no matter how many times Grandpa Kim explains it like national business. "Too soft," Zion says, leaning over the pot like a strict judge. "It was perfect yesterday," Min Jun insists. "Yesterday was luck. It was technique." Grandpa Kim doesn't look up from his coffee. "The boy is right. You've been close for a week." "Close isn't correct." Sandra stands by the doorway, watching over her cup, smiling quietly. There is no press conference for this version of him. No headline for the man who once walked away from an altar and now argues about rice in a kitchen that isn't even his. No cameras for ordinary Saturdays. No audience for the afternoons Sandra stopped pulling her hand away. Because nothing about this life is loud anymore. It doesn't need to be. This was never about the empire, or the wedding that never happened, or the company he gave up. It was about what remained when everything else was gone. A man learning how to stay. A child learning to trust consistency over promises. And a woman learning that love doesn't return as a spectacle, it returns as repetition. One morning at a time. One choice at a time. One ordinary day that no longer needs to prove anything. Zion understands this in the way children understand truth. Not because it was explained, but because it was lived. The man who once disappeared now simply stays. And slowly, the silence that once defined him is gone. Not erased. Replaced. With presence. And maybe that is what the story was always about. Not changing the past, but changing what you do when life gives you the same moment again. So I want to ask you, if someone who once left finally came back, would you wait for the perfect apology? Or trust the version of them that shows up every day after it? Tell me in the comments. If this story stayed with you, tap like, it helps more people find it. And I'll see you in the next one.